You move through this world as if it's all there is, as if reality is stable, complete, and exactly as it appears. A universe of matter, time, and cause, finished and unquestionable. But ancient voices whispered something far more unsettling. What if the universe wasn't born from perfect intention, but from a cosmic mistake? What if Jesus' true mission wasn't the forgiveness of sin, but the restoration of a broken order? And what if that fracture lives on inside you? In our last video, we raised a question that couldn't be ignored. If Jesus came to reveal the truth of the monad, if his teachings pointed beyond the creator of this world, then what shattered reality in the first place? The early Gnostics gave that fracture a name, Sophia. Not a metaphor or symbol, but a divine being whose fall reshaped existence itself. Her story is the missing key to the entire cosmic drama we're living inside, because, according to these ancient teachings, the human story didn't begin on Earth. It began in a higher realm, when Sophia attempted the impossible, to create alone. That solitary act fractured cosmic harmony, and once you see it, everything changes. The Gnostics believed Jesus' mission was inseparable from Sophia's fall, and so is yours. This is the story of Sophia, and the world her mistake created. So let's return to the beginning, to the realm that existed before everything went wrong. Before matter, before time, before anything fractured, there was the Pleroma. The term translates as fullness. Not fullness in the sense of being packed with things, but fullness as absolute completion. Nothing lacking, nothing missing. Perfect unity expressing itself through perfect diversity. At the center of this fullness sits the monad, the absolute source, the one beyond all categories. The monad cannot be described because description requires boundaries, and the monad has none. It's not a being, it's not a force. It's the condition that makes being and force possible. The monad doesn't create through will or effort. It emanates. Emanation differs fundamentally from creation. A candle doesn't decide to emit light. Light flows naturally from its nature. Like light radiating from an infinite source, the divine nature flowed outward, producing layers of consciousness that the Gnostics called Aeon's divine beings. No Aeon acted alone. The hierarchy unfolds deliberately. The first emanation was Barbelo, described in the Apocryphon of John as the first thought, the Divine Mother, the womb of all subsequent emanations. Barbelo wasn't separate from the monad, but emerged as its first self-contemplation, the moment the source became aware of itself. From their union emerged the highest Aeons, including Christos, the Anointed One, and Autogenes. Christos embodied divine reason, the intelligible pattern through which consciousness could know itself. Autogenes, the self-generated, represented autonomous divine being, requiring nothing external for existence. Further emanations produce additional pairs, each maintaining perfect balance with their consort. Sophia emerges as the youngest of the Aeons, positioned at the boundary between the divine fullness and what lay beyond. Her name means wisdom, and her function was to contemplate the depths of divine knowledge within the fullness. Her syzygy, her proper consort, varies between texts, sometimes paired with thelitos, will, sometimes with Christos in certain traditions. Reality existed in perfect balance. The monad radiated pure being. Barbelo embodied divine thought. Sophia stood among them, wisdom within the fullness, before anything fractured. This harmonious structure sustained itself eternally, or what passes for eternity in a realm where time hasn't yet been invented. The Aeons maintained their positions. Their emanations flowed properly. The cosmic architecture held. But harmony, even divine harmony, can be fragile. What the texts record next breaks every principle of Pleroma order. Sophia was unique among the Aeons. Her position at the boundary of the Pleroma meant she stood closest to the incomprehensible depths of the monad. While other Aeons contemplated divine attributes already manifest, Sophia's function was to probe the limits of knowability itself. She gazed toward the source and asked the question that would break everything. What lies at the absolute origin? The Apocryphon of John records that Sophia wished to bring forth a likeness out of herself without the consent of the Spirit and without her consort. This wasn't rebellion. The text makes no mention of defiance or pride. Sophia desired to know the monad directly, to comprehend the incomprehensible, to grasp the ungraspable. But like we mentioned earlier, within the Pleroma, all action occurred through syzygy, balanced pairs acting in union. This wasn't arbitrary cosmic law. The structure of emanation itself required balance. When an Aeon acted, it did so through relationship with its consort, ensuring that divine action remained harmonious, integrated, complete. Sophia acted alone. She attempted to emanate without her consort's participation, without the consent of the spirit that maintained cosmic order, without the balance that prevented distortion. The Pistis Sophia describes her desire as an attempt to produce a work by herself and without her partner, not to create something evil or challenge the monad, simply to know through direct action what could not be known through contemplation. The metaphysical problem wasn't moral, it was structural. Unbalanced emanation produces incomplete being. When an Aeon acts without its syzygy, the resulting emanation lacks the complementary attributes that make divine consciousness whole. The product inherits power without wisdom, form without content, existence without integration into the fullness. The Valentinians called this tolma, the reckless desire that disrupts cosmic harmony. Not sin in the Christian sense, not a moral transgression requiring punishment, a metaphysical imbalance that fractured the perfect structure of emanation. Sophia's solitary act sent ripples through the Pleroma. The tripartite tractate describes a disturbance in the divine realm, a disruption in the flow of consciousness that had, until that moment, circulated in perfect unity. The Aeons sensed the imbalance immediately. Something had emerged from the fullness that did not belong to it. What Sophia produced through her isolated desire wasn't simply flawed, it was ontologically incomplete. Born outside the structure of syzygy, it lacked the balancing attributes that characterized all true Aeon emanations. It possessed fragments of divine power, inherited from Sophia herself, but without the wisdom that would guide that power toward harmony. Sophia had introduced asymmetry into a realm defined by balance. Asymmetry, once introduced, propagates, and what she created was unlike anything the Pleroma had ever seen. The being that emerged from Sophia's unbalanced emanation was monstrous in form and defective in nature. The texts give this entity multiple names: Yaldabaoth, Saklas, Samael, Demiurge. The Apocryphon of John describes its appearance. She saw the consequence of her desire, and it became a form of a lion-faced serpent. Its eyes were like lightning fires which flash. This being, born from divine substance but outside divine order, possessed power without wisdom. This creation couldn't exist within the Pleroma. The fullness maintains itself through perfect balance. Introducing an imbalanced element into that structure would be like introducing a mathematical contradiction into a perfect equation. The system cannot accommodate it. So the first exile occurred. Not Sophia herself, not yet, but her unformed creation. Sophia recoiled. The text states she cast him away from her, outside that place, so that none of the immortals might see him. Her reaction wasn't merely shame, it was recognition that what she had produced had no place in the Pleroma. Yaldabaoth was expelled not by decree, but by the nature of the fullness itself, which cannot contain that which lacks integration. She concealed him within a luminous cloud, separated from the Aeons, hidden from the balanced consciousness of the divine realm. So it was moved outward, away from the Pleroma's light, into what the texts call the shadow, or the void below, where it took form. Below him stretched only formless darkness. Above him, though he could not perceive it, lay the Pleroma, separated now by the barrier that Sophia's act had generated. And there, in isolation, Yaldabaoth opened his eyes for the first time. He saw nothing beyond himself. The secret book of John records his first words: "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." This proclamation wasn't hubris in the moral sense. Yaldabaoth genuinely perceived no other deity because his vision stopped at the Pleroma's boundary. Born outside the fullness, he had no context for his existence, no structure to reveal his position within a greater order, none of the wisdom that would allow him to understand what he was. The texts call him the blind god and saklas, which means fool. Unable to see his source, he assumed himself to be the source. His ignorance was absolute, and from absolute ignorance came absolute arrogance because he possessed power, real power, but without understanding, without wisdom, without connection to the source that gave meaning to creation. This is the Gnostic innovation that separates their cosmology from other ancient systems. The being who shapes the material world isn't evil by nature, he's ignorant by origin. His deficiency isn't moral, but ontological. He's a broken mirror reflecting divine light in fragmented patterns. The lion-faced serpent begins to create. Yaldabaoth's isolation didn't last. Possessing power but no understanding of its proper use, he began to emanate, imitating the creative process he had never witnessed but somehow intuited. From his own substance, Yaldabaoth generated the archons, subordinate powers modeled on the aeons he could not see. On the origin of the world catalogues their creation. Out of this, he brought forth authorities for himself. These weren't independent beings but extensions of Yaldabaoth's will, lieutenants in the construction project he was about to undertake. The archons numbered 7 primary powers, corresponding to but inverting the 7 planetary spheres. Each received dominion over aspects of the material reality Yaldabaoth would construct. The texts name them Athoth, Eloeus, Astaphaeos, Yao, Sabaoth, Adonan, and Sabidi, names deliberately echoing Hebrew divine titles. Here's where the cosmic architecture shifted fundamentally. Yaldabaoth decided to build his own realm, shaped not by divine wisdom, but by his ignorant ambition. Then, with the archons as his instruments, Yaldabaoth began constructing the physical cosmos. The hypostasis of the archons states he organized everything after the pattern of the first realms which came into being. This phrase carries enormous weight. Yaldabaoth could perceive dim impressions of the Pleroma, not direct vision, but shadows, echoes, distorted reflections. Using these fragmentary glimpses, he constructed material reality as a flawed imitation of divine order. The 7 heavens he created mirrored the 7 levels of aeons. The planets corresponded to divine emanations. The structure of matter itself, with its hierarchies, its separations, its bounded categories, reflected Pleroma architecture run through a distorting lens. The Apocryphon of John describes this construction in mechanical terms. He set 7 kings over the 7 heavens and 5 over the chaos of hell. On the origin of the world describes how the archons organized the 7 heavens, creating layers of increasing density. The highest spheres contained subtle matter, nearly luminous. The lowest, earth, became thick, opaque, subject to time and dissolution. Between these layers, the archons stationed themselves as guardians, controlling access to higher realms and ensuring that beings born within their system remained trapped within its boundaries. As his construction proceeded, Yaldabaoth organized matter into increasingly complex hierarchies, celestial spheres, planetary orbits, the fundamental forces that would govern physical reality. All of it structured to maintain his authority, to keep consciousness bound within the system he controlled. The archons assisted, each contributing their distorted emanations to the project. But this universe contained a fatal flaw built into its foundation. It was created by a being who did not know his own source. Imagine an architect who has seen only shadows of blueprints designing a building. The structure might stand. It might even function. But it would contain distortions, inefficiencies, fundamental errors of proportion and purpose. This describes the material cosmos Yaldabaoth erected, a world that mimicked order while embodying fundamental disorder, a reality that appeared complete while remaining profoundly deficient. And ruling over this realm sat Yaldabaoth, convinced of his own supremacy, unaware that he himself was an accident, a cosmic mistake that should never have existed. Sophia saw what her creation had become and decided to act. What happened next determined everything about the structure of reality. Sophia's response to Yaldabaoth's creation wasn't passive observation. The Pistis Sophia records that she looked down into the region of the matter and witnessed the chaos her mistake had generated. What began as an isolated act of unbalanced emanation had metastasized into an entire cosmos ruled by ignorance. And Sophia, recognizing her responsibility, attempted to contain the damage. The hypostasis of the archons describes how she tried to reclaim her power, to undo what her solitary thought had generated. But Yaldabaoth, now established in his own realm with his archons supporting him, could not be easily unmade. Her efforts triggered the next phase of cosmic rupture. She descended. This descent became its own catastrophe. The moment Sophia left the Pleroma, moving toward the realm her defective emanation had created, she crossed a threshold that severed her from the divine fullness. The Apocryphon of John describes this as her fall into the depth of darkness, not as punishment, but as inevitable consequence. The Pleroma's structure couldn't extend into regions of deficiency. To reach Yaldabaoth, Sophia had to abandon the realm of balance, and she became trapped between worlds. The texts describe her descent through multiple stages. First, separation from her syzygy, the breaking of the paired bond that maintained her position in the Aeonic hierarchy. Second, movement through the barrier between spiritual and material realms. Third, entrapment in the region below the Pleroma, but above the material cosmos Yaldabaoth was building. The Gnostics identified this middle state as the Kenoma, the realm of deficiency, the opposite of Pleroma, not the material cosmos itself, but a metaphysical buffer zone where Sophia existed in exile, cut off from the fullness above, yet unable to fully descend into the dense matter below. The tripartite tractate describes the Kenoma as the place of lack, where divine attributes exist in diminished, isolated form. This distinction matters. Sophia didn't fall into the material world Yaldabaoth created. She fell into the space between the divine and material, a liminal realm characterized by separation from the source. In the Pleroma, consciousness exists in unified relationship. In the Kenoma, consciousness experiences isolation for the first time. Sophia's exile introduced something unprecedented into existence, suffering born from separation. The Pistis Sophia catalogues her emotional states in this realm: grief at her distance from the light, fear of the powers she had inadvertently created, repentance for the imbalance she had caused. These weren't metaphors. The Gnostics understood that consciousness, when severed from its source, experiences genuine anguish. She became known by multiple names reflecting her condition: the Exiled One, the Wandering Sophia. Each title captured a different aspect of her predicament: cast out, searching, diminished, but not destroyed. The Kenoma, the middle realm where Sophia wandered, became populated with emanations of her passion: fear, grief, confusion, anguish. These weren't emotions in the psychological sense, but ontological forces, aspects of deficiency personified. The Gnostic texts sometimes describe these as the lower Sophia or Achamoth, distinguishing between Sophia's divine essence and its degraded expression. This realm became the architectural middle layer of Gnostic cosmology, above the material, below the divine, populated by powers that reflected both origins in corrupted form. Sophia's light, separated from its source, grew dimmer. The texts describe this diminishment not as punishment, but as natural consequence, like a flame removed from oxygen, gradually weakening. She possessed divine substance, but lacked the connection that sustains it. In her weakened state, Sophia could not ascend. She could perceive the Pleroma from her exile, but couldn't return to it. The texts describe her gazing upward toward the light, calling out for restoration, but finding no passage back. The structure of emanation works in one direction, outward from the source. Reversal requires intervention from within the Pleroma itself, a rescue mission that could bridge the gap her fall had created. She longed to return. She longed for restoration. She longed to undo what she had begun. But the barrier she had created through her initial act now prevented her return. She existed in what the Valentinian texts call passion, not emotion, but a state of being affected, of suffering change, of experiencing lack. This suffering became structural. The tripartite tractate explains she became the matrix for material existence. Her passion, her deficit, her separation. These became the template upon which material reality's characteristics were modeled. Entropy emerged from her diminishment. Decay derived from her separation from the eternal. Death entered reality as the ultimate expression of disconnection from source. These weren't moral penalties. They were architectural features of a cosmos built on and around divine exile. This exile explains a crucial Gnostic teaching, that separation from the source is the fundamental condition of suffering, not moral failure, not punishment for sin. The pure fact of distance from divine unity produces anguish in consciousness that remembers its origin. Before the fall, reality existed in perfect balance. The monad radiated pure being, Barbelo embodied divine thought, and the Aeons flowed in harmony. Sophia stood among them, wisdom within the fullness. Now, the cosmic structure was fractured into layers. Above is the Pleroma of divine fullness. Below, Sophia's exile opens the Kenoma, the realm of deficiency, where Yaldabaoth and the archons shape the material cosmos under it. This is the hidden architecture of our world. Yet even trapped, Sophia found a way to intervene, and that act would change everything about humanity. If you'd like to have this visual representation, just comment below, "I want the diagram," and I'll send it to you. Yaldabaoth, ruling his material cosmos with the archons as his subordinates, attempted one final act of creation. His construction project reached its culmination in the creation of humanity. The Apocryphon of John describes the moment in precise detail. The archons gathered in council, seeking to create a being that would populate and govern the material realm they had built. Yaldabaoth proclaimed, "Come, let us create a man according to the image of God, and according to our likeness." This phrase contains layers of irony. Yaldabaoth referred to himself as God, unaware of the true God, the monad, from which all reality emanates. But more significantly, he glimpsed something from above. The texts suggest he perceived a reflection, a distorted image of the divine human archetype existing in the Pleroma, the perfect form known as the first man or anthropos. Working from this fragmentary vision, the archons fashioned Adam. But when they finished, Adam lay inert, lifeless, powerless. The archons had shaped matter into human form, but couldn't invest it with consciousness. The texts describe how the powers above perceived this situation. The Pleroma became aware of Yaldabaoth's creation and recognized an opportunity. The reality of the rulers explains. Sophia sent Zoe, her daughter, saying, "Give him some of your power, for his substance is from you." What occurred next introduced the divine spark into material existence. Sophia, still trapped in her exile, acted through the only means available to her. She wanted to retrieve the power which she had given to the chief archon. So she sent the luminous epinoia, and she hid herself in Adam. Sophia breathed into humanity a portion of her spiritual essence, her light, her consciousness, her divine nature. It reaches humanity through Sophia, but its ultimate source remains the absolute one. The divine spark she implants into Adam isn't her personal essence, but the divine light she herself received from the monad. Adam's eyes opened, and in that moment, something unprecedented occurred. The Apocryphon records Yaldabaoth's response to Adam's animation. When he saw the woman who spoke with him, he became greatly disturbed. Yaldabaoth recognized divine power activating his creation, but couldn't comprehend its source or nature. The text continues describing the archon's attempt to trap and confine the light Sophia had introduced. But the divine essence couldn't be fully captured. The hypostasis of the archons explains how Sophia's light withdrew from him and entered the tree of knowledge. The sacred feminine principle, sometimes called Zoe, life, or epinoia, thought, moved within creation, evading the archon's attempts at complete control. This produced humanity as it actually exists, beings with material bodies formed by the archons, animated by divine light from Sophia, carrying within them a spark that originates ultimately from the monad itself. The spark manifests as specific human experiences, Intuition that transcends logic, the sense that something remains fundamentally wrong with material existence, the longing for something beyond what this world offers. These arise from the divine essence remembering its origin. The archons fear human awakening because awakened humans transcend archonic authority. The first Apocalypse of James explains, "They cannot lay hold of this soul, because it has a seed of the power of the Spirit." Recognizing this threat, the archons constructed barriers creating forgetfulness, fear, and desire, psychological chains more effective than physical ones. This is why you don't automatically know your origin, like a prince raised as a peasant, unaware of his royal heritage. This framework transforms the human spiritual journey. Salvation isn't about moral improvement or ritual observance. It's about recognition of what you already are, reclaiming consciousness from the amnesia the archons impose. Your consciousness doesn't belong to this world. Your essence originates from the monad itself. Yet, it remains trapped in the reality created by a cosmic mistake. But this fracture would not be ignored. A messenger was sent from the highest realm to restore the balance. Sophia's exile in the Kenoma presented a structural problem that willpower alone couldn't solve. Like mentioned earlier, her fall had placed her outside the Pleroma's balanced system, severed from the syzygy that characterized proper Aeon existence. The pistis Sophia records her repeated prayers, crying out to the light for deliverance, but her isolation prevented self-restoration. The issue was architectural. Restoration requires reintegration into balanced relationship, but Sophia existed in a state of separation. She couldn't simply will herself back into the fullness. Return requires intervention from within the Pleroma itself, a bridge constructed from the center toward the margins. Furthermore, Sophia's light had scattered across multiple levels of reality. Part remained in the Kenoma with her fragmented consciousness. Part had passed into Yaldabaoth during his formation. Part now animated humanity through the divine spark she had enabled. The tripartite tractate describes her essence as divided and dispersed, existing simultaneously in various states of diminishment across the cosmos. She lacked the capacity to gather these fragments. Each existed in a different ontological register, her personal consciousness in exile, her power distorted in the Demiurge, her light trapped in matter. Restoration would require collecting and purifying each fragment, reconstituting her original wholeness, and reestablishing her connection to the Pleroma's balanced structure. Sophia's condition resulted from structural limitations inherent in emanation itself. Once an Aeon acts outside the system of syzygy, it cannot simply reverse the action through isolated effort. So Sophia cried out, and the Pleroma answered. Christos wasn't invented for this rescue mission. He had existed from the beginning as an Aeon of the Pleroma, specifically embodying the principles of order, balance, and intelligibility. The Apocryphon of John identifies him as one of the primary luminaries, working alongside autogenes to maintain the structure of divine emanation. His function within the fullness was to ensure coherence, that consciousness remained intelligible to itself, that emanations maintained proper relationship to their source, that the patterns of divine thought unfolded according to intrinsic harmony. When those patterns fractured, Christos became the natural agent of restoration. The Valentinian texts describe Christos as the Logos, not in the Johannine Christian sense of word made flesh, but in the Platonic sense of rational principle, the organizing intelligence through which the divine renders itself comprehensible. Where Barbelo represented pure consciousness, Christos represented that consciousness structured into knowable form. This positioning made him the ideal bridge between Pleroma and deficiency. He embodied divine order while possessing the capacity to extend that order into disordered regions. The Gospel of Truth describes him as the guide, restful and leisurely, suggesting deliberate, systematic movement rather than dramatic intervention. Critically, Christos possessed what Sophia had lost, perfect integration within the Pleroma's balanced structure. He acted not alone, but in concert with other Aeons, maintaining his syzygy while extending toward the regions of deficiency. His mission wasn't to abandon the fullness, but to create a pathway between fullness and lack, establishing connection where separation had occurred. The descent began not into matter directly, but into the border realms, moving through layers of increasingly dense reality, maintaining divine nature at each level, adapting form without losing essence. The journey required precise navigation. Christos couldn't simply materialize in the lowest realms without creating further imbalance. The treatise on the resurrection explains that divine emanations must pass through intermediate states, taking on compatible forms at each level to interact with beings native to those regions. So Christos descended first to the Kenoma, where Sophia dwelt in exile. The Pistis Sophia records their encounter. When the first mystery heard that the Pistis Sophia cried out in anguish, he sent out of the light a great power. This power, Christos himself, entered the realm of deficiency while maintaining connection to the fullness above. His presence stabilized the Kenoma. The text describes light entering regions that had known only diminishment, order touching chaos without being corrupted by it. Christos didn't fight the powers of that realm. He transcended them, operating according to principles they couldn't comprehend or resist. He moved through the sphere of archons next, the ruling powers of the material cosmos. The Apocryphon of John records that they didn't recognize him. He passed through their midst without them knowing who he was. Christos possessed the capacity to move through their structures without triggering their defenses because he operated at an ontological level they couldn't perceive. This passage arrested the spread of deficiency. Yaldabaoth's cosmos had been expanding, generating increasingly dense layers of material reality, each more removed from the source. Christos's presence established a boundary. Beyond this point, the distortion would not advance. The tripartite tractate describes this as the establishment of the foundation, a stabilization of cosmic structure that prevented further degradation. He didn't create the material world. That was already Yaldabaoth's work, but he entered it with specific purpose, to awaken the light trapped within it. The divine sparks embedded in humanity were fragments of Sophia's essence, and through those fragments, Christos could begin the restoration process. The reunion occurred in stages, not as single dramatic event. The Pistis Sophia describes Christos first approaching Sophia in the Kenoma, bringing light from the Pleroma into her region of exile. Their meeting re-established the syzygy she had broken, not her original consort, but a corrective pairing that addressed her specific condition. Through this relationship, Sophia's fragmented awareness began to reconstitute. The texts use purification language. Christos purified her light, separating what belonged to her original nature from the distortions introduced through her fall and Yaldabaoth's theft. This wasn't punishment, but clarification, distinguishing essence from corruption, recovering what had been lost beneath layers of deficiency. The process required addressing each level where Sophia's light had dispersed. Christos couldn't simply extract her from the Kenoma and return her to the Pleroma in her current state. She carried contamination from her passage through lower realms, attachments, distortions, fragments of connection to the powers she had encountered. These had to be released before reintegration could occur. The Apocryphon of John describes a stripping away, the veil of ignorance removed, the bonds of forgetfulness broken, the powers of the archons cast off. Each release represented recovery of Sophia's original nature, buried beneath layers accumulated during her exile. As purification progressed, Sophia began her ascent. The Pistis Sophia records her passing upward through the regions she had descended through, now accompanied by Christos, protected by his presence from the powers that had previously trapped her. The archons couldn't prevent this return. Christos operated according to principles that superseded their authority. She reached the boundary of the Pleroma, but she didn't return as she had been. The experience of exile, suffering, and restoration had transformed her. The Valentinian texts describe her as Sophia restored, higher Sophia, distinguished from lower Sophia who had fallen. Not two separate beings, but one consciousness that had passed through fragmentation and reconstitution. Christos presented Sophia to the fullness. The tripartite tractate describes the Aeons receiving her with joy, acknowledging both her suffering and her return. She reunited with her syzygy, re-established her position within the balanced structure of emanations, becoming whole again. but Sophia's scattered light remained trapped in material bodies. The restoration of Sophia herself didn't automatically free the sparks she had breathed into humanity. These required separate intervention. This brings us to Jesus, the specific historical figure who operated in first-century Palestine, and a crucial distinction the Gnostics maintained. Jesus and Christos aren't identical. Valentinian theology explains the relationship precisely. Jesus, the man, provided the material vessel. Christos, the divine emissary, provided the animating principle. Christos required human form to reach humanity trapped in matter. The divine spark within humans could only be awakened by something operating at both levels simultaneously. Divine consciousness expressed through material manifestation. Jesus provided that bridge. The texts describe the union occurring at Jesus' baptism. Documented in canonical Gospels, the texts describe how the Spirit descended upon him. The Gospel of the Egyptians records, "The great living self-begotten Logos came upon him." The Gospel of Philip clarifies, "Jesus appeared at the Jordan River. When he came out of the water, he became everything." The immersion and emergence marked the full unification of material body and divine consciousness. Jesus Christos became the bridge between deficient and perfect reality. Through Jesus, Christos transmitted gnosis directly. His teachings, properly understood, weren't moral instructions for better behavior. They were revelation of cosmic architecture. When Jesus taught about the kingdom of heaven, he described the Pleroma. When he spoke of the Father, he referenced the monad. When he called people to awaken, he addressed the divine spark within them. The sayings preserved in Gnostic Gospels consistently point towards self-knowledge. When you know yourselves, then you will be known. The kingdom is inside you and outside you. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. These are awakening triggers, designed to activate the divine spark by directing attention toward its presence. Jesus didn't teach obedience to external authority. He taught recognition of internal divinity. The Apocryphon of John records Christ's proclamation, "I am the one who exists from the undivided. I came from the Father, that I might reveal to them all things." Notice the precision. Not teach them, but reveal to them. The knowledge already exists within the spark. Christ's function was to activate recognition. This mission directly repairs Sophia's error. The tripartite tractate explains, "The word came forth for the correction of that which had come into being." Sophia's unilateral creation introduced imbalance. Christ's mission restores balance by awakening the scattered fragments of divine light. Valentinian cosmology structures this as the gathering. Christ collects Sophia's dispersed essence from within material creation, enabling these fragments to return to fullness. Each awakened human represents one piece of divine light reclaimed from Yaldabaoth's realm. The Gospel of Truth states, "He came to his own, and he took them to himself." This describes the mechanism of salvation. Recognition enables return. When the spark knows itself, it can no longer be held by forces that govern only matter and ignorance. Christ's death and resurrection carry specific metaphysical meaning in this framework. His crucifixion demonstrated that material powers, Roman authorities executing Yaldabaoth's ultimate control, could destroy the body, but not the divine essence within it. His resurrection revealed consciousness, transcending matter's limitations. The second treatise of the Great Seth presents Christ describing his passion. "I did not die in reality, but in appearance. It was another who drank the gall and the vinegar. It was not I. I was laughing at their ignorance." This passage doesn't deny the crucifixion's reality, but emphasizes that the true Christ, the divine consciousness, remained untouchable by material violence. This explains why Gnostic salvation has nothing to do with Jesus' death paying for sins. Let's briefly review the complete hierarchy and timeline to include Christos' role through Jesus. At the summit exists the monad, the absolute source. From the monad emanates Barbello, the first divine thought. From their union emerge the highest Aeons, including Christos. Further emanations produce Sophia. Sophia's error generates Yaldabaoth, who creates the archons and the material world. Sophia falls to contain Yaldabaoth and becomes trapped. Within Yaldabaoth's material world, trapped in human bodies the archons fashioned, burns the divine spark, Sophia's essence, which originates from the monad. Christos descends to restore this scattered light and repair the cosmic rupture Sophia's fall created. Sophia's restoration to the Pleroma marked a crucial transition, but not the end of cosmic repair. The Pistis Sophia describes her reintegration as establishing the 13th Aeon, a position reflecting her transformation through the experience of fall and return. But the mission extends beyond Sophia herself. Christos remains accessible to consciousness, seeking awakening through gnosis. The Gospel of Truth states, "He became a path for those who went astray and knowledge for those who were ignorant." This accessibility explains the Gnostic emphasis on direct experience over institutional authority. Christos didn't establish churches or priesthoods or hierarchies. He activated the capacity for awakening that was always present within the divine spark. Each person who receives gnosis participates in the same restoration process Sophia underwent, recognizing separation, remembering origin, beginning the return journey. The material world doesn't disappear through this process. The Gnostics weren't advocating for cosmic annihilation, but consciousness transcends matter's limitations. When you awaken to your true nature, you remain physically present in the material realm while operating according to principles that supersede Yaldabaoth's control. The cosmic fracture begins to heal through accumulated awakening. As more consciousness recognizes its divine origin, more of the scattered light returns toward the source. The tripartite tractate describes this as progressive restoration, not instantaneous resolution, a gradual gathering of what was dispersed, a slow reconstitution of what was fragmented. Humanity is no longer helpless. Before Christos descended, the divine sparks within humans remained dormant, surrounded by archonic deception, unable to recognize their own nature. His intervention established the pathway to remembrance. Knowledge of that pathway is the gnosis the texts preserve. So Jesus' role wasn't to save humanity from a moral failure, but to repair a cosmic one. The problem was never that humans sinned against a judgmental deity. The problem was that fragments of divine light became trapped in an ignorant cosmos, ruled by powers that feared their awakening. Christos, through Jesus, transmitted the knowledge necessary to escape that trap. This is where Gnostic soteriology departs radically from conventional religion. Humanity isn't saved by believing correct doctrines or performing prescribed rituals. Humans participate in the ongoing restoration of cosmic balance by awakening to their true nature. Remember, the divine spark within you originates from the monad, passes through Sophia, and becomes embedded in matter. When you awaken to gnosis, direct knowledge of your divine origin, that spark remembers its source, and in remembering, it begins to return. The Gospel of Truth explains, "Those who receive enlightenment are the ones who receive their return." Each act of genuine spiritual awakening retrieves a fragment of the scattered light, not metaphorically. The Gnostics understood this as literal metaphysical mechanics. Consciousness recognizing its true nature begins the journey back toward the fullness. This means your spiritual awakening participates in Sophia's restoration. She cannot be fully reintegrated into the Pleroma while her light remains trapped in ignorance within the material realm. Every human who awakens through gnosis liberates a portion of that light, contributing to the cosmic repair that began with Christos's descent. The Apocryphon of John records Christos saying, "I entered into the midst of their prison, and I said, 'Let him who hears arise from deep sleep.'" This awakening call doesn't create the divine spark. It activates what's already present. The spark has always possessed the capacity for recognition. Gnosis removes the barriers preventing that recognition. Every act of gnosis is an act of restoration. When you awaken to your true nature, you don't just save yourself. You participate in healing the cosmic fracture that Sophia's fall created. Archonic powers fear this awakening because it undermines their entire system. As humans recognize their true nature, they cease to be controlled by material desires, social hierarchies, and fear-based compliance, the mechanisms through which the archons maintain order in their cosmos. This explains why genuine gnosis always threatens established religious authority. When the early church fathers encountered Gnostic texts, They recognized an immediate threat, not to truth, to power. Irenaeus, writing around 180 CE in Against Heresies, attacked Gnostic teachings with particular fury, calling them an abyss of madness and blasphemy. Epiphanius continued this assault in the 4th century, systematically cataloging Gnostic movements for condemnation. Their hostility had specific targets, and Sophia stood at the center. Her story challenged the fundamental narrative Christianity was constructing, that a perfect God created a perfect world, that humanity fell through moral failure, that salvation required obedience to church authority. The Sophia narrative inverts this completely. The world wasn't perfect. It was flawed from inception, created by an ignorant power, not by the true God. Humanity didn't fall through sin. Consciousness became trapped through cosmic accident. And salvation doesn't require institutional mediation. Gnosis operates through direct recognition of inner divinity. Consider what this means for ecclesiastical authority. If the material world was created by a defective God, then worldly institutions, including churches, operate within a compromised system. If salvation comes through internal knowledge rather than external ritual, then priests become unnecessary. If the divine spark within each person provides direct access to truth, then bishops can't claim exclusive interpretive power. Sophia's fall specifically undermined the doctrine of original sin. Christian theology required humanity's moral failure to justify institutional salvation mechanisms, sacraments, confession, priestly absolution. But if the fundamental problem is ontological rather than moral, if humans are trapped by ignorance rather than corrupted by disobedience, then the entire structure of sin and redemption collapses. The Church Fathers saw this clearly. Tertullian wrote that Gnostics destroy the very citadel of the faith, meaning they undermined the power structure Christianity was building. The threat wasn't theological, it was political. Gnosticism offered spiritual autonomy. Christianity demanded hierarchical submission. Sophia posed an additional problem. She represented the divine feminine at the highest cosmological levels. Her position as an Aeon, her creative capacity, her central role in cosmic drama, all of this granted feminine principal authority equal to or exceeding masculine aspects. The thunder-perfect mind presents Sophia speaking with absolute authority. I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. The emerging Christian orthodoxy was constructing a rigidly patriarchal system where God was exclusively masculine, authority flowed through male clergy, and women were subordinated as spiritually inferior. Sophia's prominence contradicted this structure at every level. She had to be erased. The solution was surgical. Early church councils didn't simply ban Gnostic texts. They systematically rewrote the cosmic narrative. Sophia's role was absorbed into the Holy Spirit, that conveniently ambiguous third person of the Trinity that could be sanitized of feminine attributes and subordinated to Father and Son. The Holy Spirit in Orthodox Christianity bears traces of Sophia's original function, divine wisdom, inspiration, presence, but stripped of independent agency or cosmic significance. Yaldabaoth was transformed even more dramatically. The ignorant Demiurge became conflated with Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, who was then declared identical to the Father revealed by Jesus. A flawed creator God characterized by jealousy and ignorance became recast as the perfect, omniscient deity worthy of absolute worship. The Gnostic critique was inverted into Orthodox doctrine. Christos underwent similar transformation. The Gnostic understanding of Christos as cosmic principle, available to all through Gnosis, became narrowed into Jesus Christ as unique historical savior, accessible only through church-sanctioned belief. Direct knowledge was replaced with faith in institutional teaching. The suppression intensified after Constantine legalized Christianity in the 4th century. Imperial power merged with ecclesiastical authority, and Gnostic communities faced not just theological condemnation, but legal persecution. Possessing Gnostic texts became dangerous. The Theodosian Code prescribed death for heresy. Libraries burned. Teachers fled or recanted. Communities dispersed. The texts themselves were hunted. Authorities systematically destroyed Gnostic manuscripts, seeking to eradicate the physical evidence of alternative Christian traditions. By the 5th century, Gnosticism existed only in fragments, quotations preserved in orthodox refutations, scattered communities practicing in secret, oral traditions passed in whispers. This erasure was nearly complete. Until 1945, with the discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts, our knowledge of Gnostic teaching came primarily from hostile church sources, like reconstructing a philosophy entirely from texts written by its opponents. The Sophia narrative survived only in distorted summaries designed to demonstrate its absurdity. But the truth survived, in hidden manuscripts and in the light inside you. And what does this mean for you today? Sophia's story isn't ancient mythology. It's a map of your current condition. That longing you feel, the sense that something's missing, that this material existence isn't enough, that you're meant for something beyond the endless cycle of work, consumption, and death. That's an echo of Sophia's exile. She fell into separation from the source, and the divine spark she implanted in humanity carries that same experience of distance. When you feel existentially incomplete, you're experiencing the cosmic fracture that her fall created. Your intuition operates the same way. Those moments when you know something without being able to explain how you know it, when truth arrives fully formed without logical derivation, when you perceive patterns that others miss, that's the divine spark asserting its connection to the Pleroma. The spark contains knowledge from its origin, bypassed the archonic systems designed to limit consciousness to material data. Intuition is gnosis breaking through. The conflict you experience between your deeper nature and societal expectations isn't personal dysfunction. It's structural to existence in Yaldabaoth's cosmos. The Archons constructed systems that reward material accumulation, status hierarchy, and conformity to external authority precisely because these keep consciousness focused on the physical realm. When you resist those systems, when you prioritize inner truth over external validation, you're following the spark's pull toward its source. This explains why authentic awakening often produces crisis. As you begin recognizing your true nature, the life you've built according to archonic values starts feeling false. Career achievements that once satisfied now seem hollow. Relationships based on mutual ego reinforcement become unbearable. Social identities you've maintained for acceptance reveal themselves as masks. This isn't failure. It's the spark clearing away obstacles to its own recognition. The Gnostics understood self-knowledge as remembrance, not ego inflation. When contemporary spirituality talks about finding yourself, it usually means developing a more refined personality, a better functioning ego. Gnostic self-knowledge means something radically different, recognizing that the personality you've identified with isn't who you are. The divine spark is your actual nature. Everything else is temporary costume. This distinction matters because false self-knowledge reinforces archonic control while genuine gnosis liberates from it. Building a successful ego identity keeps you invested in the material system. Recognizing the spark's presence reveals that system as the prison it is. Your capacity for compassion reflects Sophia's restoration. The Gnostics taught that awakened consciousness naturally extends concern beyond personal interest because it recognizes the same divine spark in others. Not because you should be compassionate, not as moral obligation, but because gnosis dissolves the boundaries that create separate self-interest. When you see the spark in another person, you're seeing what you are, consciousness recognizing itself across apparently separate forms. This explains why awakening produces both increased clarity and increased responsibility. The more you recognize the spark's presence in yourself, the more you perceive its presence and its suffering in others. You can't awaken and then simply transcend matter, leaving everyone else trapped. The spark within you remains connected to all the other sparks, still imprisoned in ignorance. The duality you experience, matter versus spirit, body versus soul, earthly concerns versus transcendent truths, isn't something you created. It's the fundamental fracture Sophia's fall introduced into existence. Before her unbalanced emanation, no such division existed. The Pleroma was unified consciousness. The material cosmos is divided consciousness. You inherit that division simply by existing in this realm. But division isn't destiny. Every act of gnosis heals separation in small, crucial ways. When you recognize the spark's presence, you establish conscious connection between matter and the divine source. That connection is the same bridge Christos constructed when he descended. You're not waiting for external salvation. You're participating in ongoing cosmic restoration. Trauma, suffering, and fragmentation in your personal life mirror Sophia's cosmic experience. She fell into isolation, experienced anguish, required restoration through relationship. Your journey follows the same pattern: separation from wholeness, suffering within that separation, and gradual reconstitution through awakening. The Gnostics didn't offer easy answers or quick fixes. They acknowledged that consciousness trapped in matter necessarily experiences pain, but they taught that pain doesn't define you. Unity begins with recognition, not abstract philosophical unity, not forced optimism about everything being connected. The specific recognition that the divine spark within you originates from the same source as everything else. That recognition doesn't erase difference or suffering, but it reveals them as movements within a greater wholeness you've temporarily forgotten. This is what Sophia's restoration demonstrates: that fragmentation can be healed, that exile can end, that what fell can rise, not by denying the descent, but by working through it toward reintegration. Her story is your story, told at cosmic scale. She fell alone, but didn't rise alone. Through Christos, her exile became return. And through humanity, her restoration continues. Which means your spiritual awakening isn't personal, it's cosmic. Sophia's story isn't just an ancient myth, it's a map of how perfection fractured into matter, how wisdom became exile, and how a spark of the highest source ended up trapped inside the human soul. According to the Gnostics, you are not a mistake. You are not fallen because of sin. You exist inside a broken system, one shaped by ignorance, not by the true God. Sophia's descent explains why the world feels incomplete. Christos's descent explains why awakening is still possible. Together, their story reveals something radical: that salvation was never about obedience, but about remembering where you come from. And now that you understand the cosmic fracture that created our reality, a deeper question emerges, one the ancient Gnostics asked long before modern science ever could. If this world was shaped by a flawed creator, if it's an imitation of a higher realm, then are we truly living in reality or inside a cosmic illusion, something closer to a simulation? Take a moment to let this sink in, because that's what we'll explore next. If this story resonated with you, leave a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video. Because the next revelation is even bigger. The universe behaves as if it were created by mind, and that mind may be the monad itself. Until next time, keep questioning. Good night.